What happens when you mix Hades with Bayonetta and add 3-player co-op? Well, with that combination, you would get Windblown. Windblown, which is a game that I'm going to cover in this video, is an onslaught of hyper-fast dashes, comboing weapons together with alter attacks, and build crafting that only gets easier with each consecutive run. Let's dive into the gameplay and combat. Starting off in Windblown, the player gradually earns the base abilities through progressing in each run. It starts with adding a second weapon, then comes the trinkets that are tied to the left and right bumper, then we get introduced to the alter attack, which is the game's most important mechanic to master. The last two abilities that the player earns is the second alter attack, which is performed by comboing the alter attacks together, and a finishing move called Crystallize, which is triggered via the left trigger when the enemy's health bar is close to being fully depleted. It sounds complicated, but it becomes second nature after getting used to it. To succeed in Windblown requires players to successfully dodge enemy attacks while performing combos with the weapons and chaining the alter attacks together, then finishing off the enemies with the Crystallize. It is a hectic and hyperactive bout that keeps you on your toes while making you feel super powerful. The other mechanic that is not told to the player is the dodge offset-like mechanic. This is where Bayonetta's influence comes into play. Your combos are remembered even while dashing. The easiest way to describe this is that when you dash, your combos do not reset. So for example, my two favorite weapons are the fish knife and the telepike. Both only require a 3-hit combo to initiate the alter attack for both weapons. But you can dash, attack, dash, attack, dash, and attack, and the alter attack will be available. It is a bit complicated to describe, but once you understand it, it adds that extra layer of depth that raises the skill ceiling, and it gives players another nugget to chase. There used to be a mechanic in the game that was exclusive to co-op called sudden death. To describe this, if you're playing in co-op and your partner falls in battle, the game would trigger sudden death, which means the player dies in one hit and has to kill a certain number of enemies to bring their teammate back. A couple months after the game was released, and with the help of the community, they dropped the Revenge update, which completely revamped sudden death. Now, with Revenge, you deal increased damage and move faster, but enemies also deal increased damage. All in all, I think it was a good change. Another feature that has been added recently is Endless Mode. I haven't dabbled too much into what this brings, but its additions on paper are awesome and highlight the beauty that comes from games in early access. They keep changing and evolving through time. The best part is Motion Twin's ability to listen and adapt to their community. On the game's store page, in Steam lies their update announcements, and in those announcements they put a star next to the changes that are community inspired, which I think is neat. Build crafting, gear, and upgrades. As you get accustomed to the runs, the game will start to show its cards when it comes to power scaling and build crafting. As mentioned earlier, there are different weapons, and each weapon has weapon levels that may add different affixes or attributes to the weapon. Some examples are adding burn damage to the weapons, or adding affixes that increase backstab damage. These go hand in hand with the different gifts to determine what build you will be able to go for in the run. My favorite builds to go for are burn builds and brutality builds. These help sustain damage output, which synergizes with what I like to do, which is a constant barrage of attacks and dashes. On top of these gifts, there are also boosts which act as stat upgrades. These boosts are passives, and the choices are either a health increase, damage increase, increase in attack speeds, or you can choose to increase the amount of loot that the team earns. There is a large variety of builds that players can go for, and each will synergize with their playstyle differently. You can have a ranged weapon and a close quarter weapon with backstab build that allows for mega damage if the attacks are landed properly. Or you can go for a burn build where each attack applies burn to the enemy, which can be accentuated by acquiring gifts that increase the duration that the enemy is burned, or by having gifts that increase the damage of a given status effect. Lastly, there is a slew of pickups that can be picked up during a run. The main category for these are the different currencies such as shells, cogs, and the dust/shards/fragments. Each of these have their own use cases, and there is also healing and food items to replenish health during a run. And after each biome, you do get treated to a store where you can spend your shells. Story, world, and sound. I only really have a couple critiques or problems with this title. The first one I have for the game is that outside of the NPCs that show up in the hub world that offer some dialogue, there really is not much of a story here. Most of the cutscenes that are present in the game are very short and act as an introduction to the bosses that you will face. The end does not have any sort of plot payoff, but that may change after the game fully releases out of early access. There are small nooks and crannies to explore in the Ark, which is the hub world, and there are secrets and side areas to find hidden away within the 5 biomes. The world is gorgeous. It has a cel-shaded flare that is so inviting. Each of the biomes have a striking color variety and each have a different theme and feel to them. My favorite biome comes in the 3rd stage called Rat Village. This one has an underlying pirate theme with the enemies and the environment. Plus it has a striking deep blue and purple color palette that brings out a dark, moody, and eerie vibe. But with each biome comes a different set of colors and mood that Motion Twin plays expertly with. As for the music, the game's OST is incredible and full of bops. The soundtrack is made by an artist named Danger. The music is a blend of electronic, synthwave, and dark cinematic elements that really set a great mood. From the intro sequence when booting up the game to the serenity that comes from the hub areas, the entire soundtrack is out on streaming services, and I highly recommend giving it a listen, even if you do not plan on checking out the game. But the thing that stood out the most was the artist's bio. It reads, "As a child, I grew up sitting in front of a computer by myself. That is where I learnt about music, playing video games and watching endless reruns of cartoons and American TV shows. Television gave me shelter when I was alone, nursed me with Hollywood's mythologies. It guided me through nameless countries. With it, I brought down Colossus and climbed mountains. I preached its beliefs, but when I grew up, all my heroes died." Interesting, huh? But for the music from this artist, it is best for me to show. So here are some examples. Graphics, performance, and Steam Deck. Now onto the last real con I have, and that is performance. It is not broken or unplayable, but in my opinion, it could be better. As I mentioned, Windblown is a beautiful game, and the majority of my time was spent on PC. My rig is a Ryzen 7 5700X 3D CPU and a 4070 Ti Super GPU. And at 4K, I had to set the game to the medium preset for me to not have any major stuttering. I set everything to 120 FPS, but it would still stutter a little bit when dashing or performing alt attacks, and the frames would drop when the screen was full of enemies, especially in co-op. I have only spent a few runs on the Steam Deck, but it is nice because there is a Steam Deck preset in the settings. How I ran the game on the deck was I set the resolution to 720p, and I capped the frames at 60. While the Steam page does say it is deck verified, the results in my experience do vary, and the game does get less performant considering your situation. I only played solo in my time on deck, but what I noticed is the further I got into the runs, the worse my frames would get. To start in the hub area and in the first area, I would hover around 50-60 frames, but once I got to the second area, it would drop to around 40 to 50 frames. Which is still playable on a handheld, but that's just something to note. Accessibility and options. There is a decent amount of options in the game. The graphics tab has a lot of options to tailor the experience. The accessibility tab is somewhat light, but here lies the one option I do suggest changing, which is setting the auto dash to banger pulsar. There is an audio tab, a chat tab, and there is settings that enable text and voice chat. There's also push to talk, and lastly, there's the controls and key bindings tab. So there's a fair bit of amount of customization here. In conclusion, Windblown is a blast. I loved every second I played of it, and it is such a smart idea to have co-op in a game like this. This gaming season is very busy and full of huge AAA games, but I still think that it is worth it checking out and supporting these smaller titles because they paved the way for AAA teams. So all in all, I think Windblown is worth checking out. And for being in early access, it is a pretty polished game that is a blast to play. I'm looking forward to seeing how this game changes and evolves over time, and I'm excited to see this game launch on consoles. I especially think that this game would be right at home on the Switch too. And that is all I have for Windblown. If you guys want to see me play some games or hang out and chat, I do stream on Twitch pretty occasionally at twitch.tv/subagels. And of course, check out Lords of Gaming for all your gaming news, coverage, reviews, tips and tricks, and all of that. And that is all for this video. Peace out.